All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call the order the regularly scheduled meeting of the Beloit City Council. It is 100 State Street at Beloit, Wisconsin, Tuesday, January 19th. It is now a little slightly after 7 p.m. Roll call.
All members are present.
Second item will be Pledge of Allegiance. Will you please stand? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Item 3 would be special orders of the day and announcements. We don't have any today. Item 4, public hearings. We have none. So we'll move straight on to item 5, which is citizens' participation. We have reached the point of the meeting for members of the public to speak to the council about issues that are coming before us or may come before us in the future. The council will not act on any requests this evening unless your item is already on the agenda, but we may act on requests at a future meeting or may refer the speaker to staff for assistance. We ask that you hold your comments to 3 minutes or less and avoid making personal attacks. I have no sheets indicating anyone wishes to come forward and speak under citizens' participation, so I'll open the floor. If we have any persons wishing to come forward and speak under citizens' participation, please approach the podium and state your name and address. Second call for persons to come forward and speak under citizens' participation. Third and final call for persons to come forward and speak under citizens' participation. Hearing none, I'll close item 5, citizens' participation, and we'll move on to item 6, which is the consent agenda. All items listed under the consent agenda are considered routine and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a council member so requests, in which event the item will be removed from the general order of business and considered at this point on the agenda. Do we have any councilors wishing to remove something from the consent agenda? Hearing none, the consent agenda consists of items 6A through 6H. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Kincaid and second by Lubke. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Item passes by a vote of 7-0. Item 7 would be ordinances. There are none. 8, appointments. There are none. Item 9 is councilor activities and upcoming events, and I will go start with Councilor Sloniker.
I have nothing to share.
Thank you. And Councilor Hendricks.
I attended 2 Martin Luther King events over the weekend, celebration events. On Sunday, I attended the annual MLK celebration at New Zion Baptist Church, hosted by the Beloit Area Ministers Fellowship, and I actually sang in the choir. That was fun. And then on Monday, I attended the Martin Luther King convocation at Beloit College, where last year I spoke, but this year I got to see my best friend's husband speak, where he charged the audience to not only connect with the moments, but commit to a movement. So it was an inspiring speech and a way to recharge. So that's it.
Thank you. Councilor Lubke.
I was able to attend with Councilor DeForest the Lenigan Creek Bridge that will be built by the Burger King on 4th Street. I, too, with other councilors, Saturday at Black Hawk Tech for the Martin Luther King celebration, featuring the Beloit and Janesville schools and many students and many individuals. Our city managers there, our police chief and fire chief were there. Just a very nice event. But I was most pleased to be last week at 2 promotions, well, 2 events with our police. 6 new officers were brought aboard. They'll be in training right now at Black Hawk Tech. And we had 2 promotions to sergeant. And very nice ceremony, Chief. Just very nice to be there. That's all I have.
Thank you. Councilor Kelly.
I have nothing to add.
All right, thank you. Councilor Kincaid.
I attended the Diversity Action, the Martin Luther King program over the weekend at Janesville. I was particularly impressed with the idea that we had both the Janesville folks and Beloit, and they put on a very fine program. I too also went to the Lenigan Creek program at the with the city, and some important things came up and for us to work on.
Okay. Thank you. And Councilor DeForest.
Thank you. The Lenigan Creek public information meeting that my two colleagues referenced, I guess I wanted to make a point that whenever we are about to do any new infrastructure, we always make an effort to reach out to the residents and the business owners that are affected in that particular area to make sure they have the information about what our plans are, and then also to receive input from them about changes they'd like to see. It was really helpful, for example, to have Janelle Maratz from the School District of Beloit there to share with us her concerns about students using that bridge as a frequent pedestrian throughway before and after school, and so that input was helpful, and with that input we were able to really think more thoughtfully about the construction timelines for that bridge. So I really want to encourage residents to take the branch that we've extended to them to really participate in those public information meetings. They're really important, and I always make a point of getting to all of them that I can so I can hear from you about what kind of things we need to keep in mind. I would like to thank Therese Oldenburg for her development of a new website. It's beloitrecreation.com. It's a website to support our Beloit Parks, Recreation, and Leisure Services. So thank you to Therese for that. Please check out the website. It's beautiful. She's done a great job with it. Again, that's beloitrecreation.com. I'm pleased that I actually did a little recreational activities myself and went to the ice arena and checked out the improvements there. We have invested recently in the ice arena, making it a little warmer place. So I appreciated that, especially with the day that I went, particularly cold. And we've really made some beautiful facility improvements to the locker rooms. We have a lot of people that come through our city for hockey tournaments, and so we want to put on our best face when they're coming to our ice arena. So I appreciated going there to see firsthand the improvements. I was pleased to attend a Second Harvest celebration of a $50,000 Alliant donation to their mobile food pantries. Many of you know that I work personally on the side very hard on food security, food access, and so I'm really pleased that Alliant Energy stepped up to support our efforts to make sure that no one goes hungry. I don't know if the community realizes we have over 500 people that attend our mobile food pantries every week. That's a lot of people, 500 people that are going hungry and that we're trying to feed. Winterfest activities are coming up Friday, January 29th through Sunday the 31st. So get out there. There's no excuse about being too cold. There's lots of activities that are indoors or that have warming stations. So encourage you to check that out on our website. And then finally, I do want to just mention the names of the new officers and the two sergeants that have been promoted. I think it's really helpful in the community that we get to know our officers. We get to know their names and know who they are. That hasn't always been encouraged in the past. And so I would like to congratulate our new officers, Kelly, Reinhold, Barker, Highland, Jones, and Smith, and the two sergeant promotions, Lefebvre and Dalton. So pleased that we've got such great movement on filling those vacant positions. Those vacancies have been there too long, and we need our full force out in the streets. So pleased with the public presentation of those. Thank you, Chief. Thank you.
All right, and I have nothing to add under our comments. So item 10 would be City Manager's presentation. 10A
is a presentation by Hillard Heinz, LLC, of the independent assessment of the Beloit Police Department.
All right, thank you. While Ken gets ready to present, first what will happen is he will go ahead and give his presentation. First, the City Manager will go ahead and offer up a little bit of background, and when some of his recommendations are brought before, the interim chief will go ahead and address some of the things that we've been doing. The councilors may ask questions at certain times, but there will be no questions from the floor. So thank you, Madam City Manager.
Thank you. The City Council retained Hillard Heinz in February of 2015 to conduct a full independent assessment of the Beloit Police Department. During the beginning phases of the assessment, urgent safety and liability issues within the department were identified, and that is the point in time that independent investigations were initiated. These actions delayed Hillard and Heinz's ability to publicly present the results of the assessment until those personnel issues were resolved. The city invested significant resources to have this assessment conducted, and it is important that we fully understand as a community
the breadth and depth of the findings, and be held accountable for the implementation of the recommendations it contains. I am pleased to report that the department has made great strides in implementing the recommendations, but I must stress that there is much more work to be done. Additional issues continue to be identified, and we work on prioritizing those and moving forward. The Hillard-Hines report contains 15 key findings that fall across 11 specific areas of recommendations. Ken Boucher and Christy Bouillon of Hillard & Hines will be presenting those recommendations and those findings. We will also interject as we discuss the specific recommendations where the city has made progress to date. The document before you summarizes that progress, and we will continue to keep the public informed as we strive to professionalize, modernize, and bring the department and the city forward. Thank you.
Ken.
President Haynes, members of the City Council, I'd like to start. I think it's important to say at this point, since I'm really no longer under contract and this is not really sucking up, but the reality is this type of initiative, when you're not necessarily under crisis, but when the council looked to the police department and they heard problems, they had issues, and you acted, and honestly you acted bravely. And then when you were presented with problems and presented with issues of the magnitude that the city manager discussed, you also acted, and you acted wisely and quickly. And you know, policing in the country right now is at a crossroads, and there's so many things that are happening, and it comes down to several pieces, but it always comes down to leadership. Leadership of the city council, the past city manager, the present city manager is really one of the strongest things that have made this come forward in a very positive way. So I'm really excited to be here today, not to present the findings because you've seen them, you've read them, they're becoming public now, but why I'm excited is because it's so obvious that the city is moving forward. One thing that happens when we finish assessments like this, especially when there's significant progress, you can't imagine, I counted this week as I was preparing, I have 11 emails, about 4 or 5 phone calls, and 1 holiday card from members of the department talking about how great things are going and how morale is up and how things are moving forward. And I think hearing Councilwoman DeForest talk about the promotions is really exciting. So I think that the congratulations goes to you for honestly for the courage to move forward under difficult conditions and to provide that leadership. The report, as you know, is pretty extensive. We could go through it in detail. We could be here for a couple of days. So my approach is with your indulgence would be to go through this in 2 parts. One is going to be the key findings, which at a high level I will discuss the key findings of the report, and there are 14 key findings. Now there's 14 key findings and 11 chapters with recommendations, which people get a little bit confused about. So just so there's understanding that the key findings in many ways cross several of the chapters, because what could be an issue in patrol could also be an issue in leadership. So they're not one-to-one matches. So I'll go through the key findings. Please don't hesitate to stop and ask questions as I'm going along. If I'm not giving information, going too fast or going too slow, and you want me to go quicker, just let me know. If we could switch to the presentation, there we go. So that's our agenda for tonight. That's how wonderful we are, but you guys already know that. But what I really want to do is I want to talk about first, the acute need for change within the department. And when we came in, and we were brought in realistically because 2 things happened. Many of you were made aware of issues that were in the department, and you questioned the city manager at that point. The city manager looked at this and said, we're hearing a lot of rumbling. So one of the most important things that happened was the information came forward that there was going to be an assessment. It would be independent, and both the city manager and this body really promised the department that it was going to be anonymous. They could deal with anonymity. They would be dealt with anonymity, and then the facts would be brought forward and tested. And if they stood the test, then they would become part of the report. And what we really found was that through the department, when people started to realize that was an actual promise, they really came forward, and that's when the issues really started to come to light. And they come across these areas that we're going to talk about. But I could tell you that the first one, leadership and supervision, is one of the most critical pieces in any police organization. It's critical in any organization, but in policing, when we have failures, we can almost always go back to, is it a failure of policy, is it a failure of practice, or is it a failure of leadership? And we found some significant issues immediately with leadership that really went through the entire organization. I think that when we go into the recommendations, we'll go into a little bit deeper on those pieces. The second key finding was really that as an organization, the department had some significant strengths. That when we sat down and we talked to the men and women that ranged from some of the captains all the way down to the patrolmen and the civilian employees, that despite the fact that one, they were deeply afraid of retribution for their involvement in this, and two, they were somewhat demoralized, they still went out every day and did their job. And in our first week here, we were able to do a lot of ride-alongs. And in fact, we did a ride-along, or had a face-to-face meeting with everyone who requested it. There were a few that, because of vacations or training, we talked to on the phone. And we talked to about 80% of the department. And those who we didn't talk to were given plenty of opportunity and chose not to. Across the board, what we really found in the early pieces was that you had a police force that's committed to the organization. And I can give a story that on my first ride-along, I went out with an officer who, honestly, at that point in his career, wouldn't be what you would consider one of the favored officers in the department. He actually was an officer that came across from some command members as being someone they wish they didn't have. And I watched this officer interact with a citizen of Beloit who had their identity stolen. In fact, the individual didn't have it stolen, his daughter did, who wasn't even present. And the interactions between this officer and this citizen were so positive that I just couldn't reconcile the fact that this was one of those people that I've heard so many bad things about. And listening to this officer's story, it really helped us realize that the leadership that has changed in the department that you brought forward is really one of the biggest pieces that moved it forward. We found this time and again. Officers committed to Beloit, not necessarily having the direction that they wanted or needed, but certainly going out on every day trying to do the job to the best of their ability. We saw tremendous problems and issues like staffing and in overtime. There was resource constraints. There were officers that were working a tremendous amount of overtime voluntarily in some cases and ordered in some cases, and they just kept chugging along. And I think that it's a testament. It's a testament to their work ethic. It's a testament to the supervisors who were working the street and really the organization, the men and women who make up the organization now. We also did a survey of the community, and I think it was really important to understand that when, this is a summary of really what we found, is that an overwhelming majority, 70% of the community members surveyed, said that the BPD officers treated people fairly. 80% said that they treated them with respect. These are not common numbers in community surveys. We do this quite frequently. Now you have officers that were in an environment that I described as demoralizing, and they were afraid, yet still the community felt that they were out acting in their best interest. At the same time, overall, 70% of the community were not satisfied with the overall performance of the police department. And there's many reasons that we can point to for that. The spike in violence, quite honestly, the limited communications between the command of the department and the community, the limited interactions on community policing. I think people felt disconnected from the department but could connect to the officers that they would be engaged with. A key piece and one problem that ranks right up with leadership, and it's a part of leadership, is strategy. And policing is really about strategy. It's about understanding what your expectations from your community, what your expectations are, how you're going to act upon them, how you're going to look at the problems within the community and bring about solutions, and give guidance to the organization on how they can move forward. not prescriptive guidance, not saying go out and shake 3 doors, write 2 tickets, and kick 1 dog. That's not really what we're talking about. We're really talking about a strategy that empowers people, officers, as they engage the community to use the tools in their tool chest to help bring about positive change, whether it's making an arrest or, helping someone on a community issue. The strategic plan that sets out really the direction of the organization as it can move forward and trickles down to every officer and every civilian so they feel part of it. It's key. It's an essential part of a professional organization. It really was non-existent in the Beloit Police Department. What was existent, and when we first sat down, we heard about the beat management plan, and actually in patrol, what we found what was a plan on its surface to do really good things, and I could tell you that the beat management plan, normally called the BMP, started out as a really positive idea, and it really was to encourage officers to do the type of activities that in many times officers don't necessarily want to do. Ticket cars, shake doors, do different type of checks. But the problem that happened is in the absence of any other strategy, it became the only strategy. And it really became a strategy of very technical and tactile moves by officers in the department that really made no sense in the end. When you looked at them on paper, they made sense, but when you looked at the application, it really wasn't working. And it wasn't working because it was missing that key part of the strategy that really brought forward the essence of what the police officers should be doing and replaced it with just almost robotic quota-like moves. So it was a huge missing piece of the strategic plan. And then really when we talk about the lack of planning and foresight is when you looked at the problems that the city had engaged 2 years prior, and that the spike in violence, and really the spike in violent crimes, shootings, and murders, and there was no strategy to effectively reduce that, impact it, investigate it, or move beyond it. It really was non-existent. And for the level of impact that it had on this community, that was really a shame. It really did some damage to the organization. So we talk about leadership. There were so many examples of problems with leadership. We talk about unilateral decision making. So in an organization, there were so many examples of when the police chief or the assistant police chief would make decisions that wouldn't be communicated to the organization. They would be unilateral. Sometimes they would be decisions of activities that would occur that would gain notoriety in the press, but yet no one in the department knew about them. They would be decisions based on a single incident. What we found several times is policies were created because of what was perceived as a single mistake that would ultimately handcuff officers in doing their job so not to have another problem. And I have up there the detainee policy. There was a questionable conversation between a police officer and a detainee. Based on that conversation, there was a policy that was written that in essence said you could not ask any personal questions. The intent of the policy was to make sure that a professional demeanor was maintained through the entire booking process. But because there was no training, because there was no understanding of why it was put into effect, officers took this, one, because of their fear of making a mistake, and two, just because they didn't understand what the policy meant, two, they couldn't ask personal questions. So they would be bringing people in, and they would not ask them routine booking questions or proceed down paths of logical questions when people would bring situations that they're concerned because they were afraid they would be violating this policy. So I don't really think bad things came out of this. We'll never know. We won't know what information we didn't get because you didn't get it. But it's a clear example of let's make a policy to make sure that mistake never happens again without having any understanding of really how it would impact the department. We spend a lot of time on the hiring process. The hiring process really, it was like none I've ever seen. It didn't follow logical standards. They were rules that were made up by the police chief without any real logic or testing of best practices. And that's the other issue, is that there were practices that happened that on the surface that anyone who served in any type of leadership position would understand that that's probably not the best way to go. But certainly anyone who's making a decision on hiring would realize that these practices in many cases could be challenged for their constitutionality and in many ways their legality in the way that they were presented. So when asked, we talk about command staff, when we asked about the hiring process, our team was pretty shocked by what we learned about how people were hired. And all the way up to the deputy chief, we believe that there was a portion of hiring that no one had visibility into other than the chief. And so that really helped us believe that these type of decisions were made in such a vacuum that they were just bad for the entire agency. So we have a lot of examples. Officers regularly talked about how they were really, how they weren't, it's not really disciplined, but really how they were kept under wraps. Things like denying training. When you're scheduled to go to training, but you may make a mistake or you may irritate someone and your training gets canceled and you're given no notice as to why. Commendations that officers, supervisors would write up and send up the chain of command that were unilaterally denied. And even when we looked at the forms, we would see they were denied and there was no rationale for it. They seemed logical. And I could tell you that in the one instance, the officer that I talked to you about, in fact, this is how it got called to our attention that I talked to you about that I was impressed with, was denied for a commendation that other members of city employment in the city of Beloit were engaged in the same activity and they were given awards and his was denied. So from a different agency they recognized how important it was. So I think that those kind of things were really demoralizing for the agency. Failure to follow rules that even followed law. We had a situation where an individual was arrested, a legitimate arrest. The individual had gambling money. The gambling money was unilaterally returned by the deputy chief, even though there was direction not to return it, that it was an open investigation, and there were decisions made that just make this go away. Bad move, really a poor police move, but think of how demoralizing that can be for a department that is trying to move forward and do positive things and to have that happen. We spend a lot of time in the report talking about the hiring process and the application process. One that stood out was an applicant that had a felony conviction and other convictions from arrests from the Beloit Police Department that by Wisconsin law forbid that person from becoming a police officer. With the only way it could ever happen was with a gubernatorial pardon. Short of that, couldn't happen. Yet this person was moved forward in the hiring process to the point where that the deputy chief and chief were attempting to help, made help available to this individual to try to get an expungement, to move him forward as part of this hiring process that really made no sense. I'm going fast. There's so many examples that are put forward in the report. We talk about the attempt to force a pregnant officer into FMLA. What we did see is we saw decisions made and comments made by the police chief that clearly made us realize that there was no understanding of really federal law and how individuals could be treated under FMLA and federal law, how they could be considered for hiring or promotion, and I think that those are all outlined in the report. Demoralizing, unprofessional conduct, letters of complaints. We talk about internal affairs in the report, and I'll get to that. Very poorly handled, very unprofessionally done, mismanaged to a degree that I can tell you that we're unable to actually do an audit of the files because the ones that existed, some existed in the deputy chief's desk, some existed with the secretary, some just were never found. But what brought this problem to our attention was a letter that we received from a citizen who filed a complaint, and in that letter it said, the complaint that you filed was investigated and unfounded. However, during the course of the investigation, we found other administrative violations which the officer was disciplined for. And for our assessors, and it struck us as this was a pretty unprofessional way to move forward. And what it made us believe was that it was a way to tell a citizen that, don't worry, we did an investigation and we punished the officer. But what happened was officers were demoralized, and it was a minor administrative violation that was called out in the public. There were so many examples of officers reaching out for help. how do I do my job better? The classic one is trying to get legal assistance. We heard it both from the city attorney and from the district attorney, as well as officers throughout the department, that they were afraid to ask questions about laws, because if they did, they had to go through their sergeant had to go through their captain, and all along the line, they never really got their answers. So their training was really not consistent, it was not timely, and they weren't getting information, and they were denied the ability to reach outside of the organization and seek help. So, in with that, there was a lot of examples, tremendous examples in investigation, in record keeping, even in some of the patrol standard legal issues where supervisors did not have the training and did not have the experience or ability to answer common legal questions. And what we found was that the training just didn't happen at the rate that it should happen. I know I'm going pretty fast, and I apologize for that. More of the survey results, some of these came from inside of the department, and what you can see, I don't have to read them all, but if you look at them, you could see that the department itself was, at this point, totally demoralized, which is one of the reasons that I'm so proud of what they did and who they have continued to become, because despite these type of answers, you saw the answers from the citizens who didn't feel that type of morale towards them that the officers felt towards themselves. There's again, a lot of this focuses on leadership. There was very little communications down to the officers about what they should be doing. There was little to no recognition or support. Once it was determined that an assessment was going to happen, we did see an increase in that, but it really, when the officers started receiving it, it was almost insulting to them, because now they know that they were getting it because they felt that leadership was under scrutiny. They really believed that leadership was detached, that they had no real connection. That was a common theme throughout all of our discussions with officers. There was very little communication with city leadership. There was a belief that information, especially problems, should never leave the department and were maintained under the cloak of secrecy. Officers feared calling the city attorney. It didn't happen even when they needed help. But throughout everything, we have several examples of just information that should have gone forward that just sat and was hidden until the problem just went away by itself. The problem didn't really go away. No one just really discovered it. There was little communication with the community. In our discussions with the police chief and the deputy chief, they did give examples of communication with the community, and there were attempts. I mean, there were some groups that they did communicate with, but when you looked at the serious issues that Beloit was facing, the level of communication fell woefully short. It was an interesting phenomenon that we found about Beloit. This is the biggest little city we've ever worked in, and the fact of the matter is that you're in this location where you're surrounded by interstates and crossroads and major cities, and you're kind of an island to yourself, and you have the resources of a major city, you have the problems of a major city, probably without a lot of the resources, but communication is so key, and that rarely happened. Going through number 6, there really wasn't a strategy in patrol. There was the BMP, the Beat Management Plan, which gave direction, which was so strictly followed it was really the only thing that happened. But there was, as you could see from so many of the examples that we give up here, is that there was very little direction in other areas. And we've seen a significant change in that. And in fact, as we came in, and I have to give a credit to the patrol captain, because as we came in, he was fixing problems as we were identifying them, and I thought that was a great sign. So we saw things moving forward quicker than we saw in any other area of the department. So I think that you really have moved forward in this area in a lot of ways, and you will talk about the recommendations and what's happened there. The field supervision was another area. The sergeants had become administrative managers. Their burden to do administrative work, paperwork, they would respond to emergencies, but that was it. And you had, on some shifts, you had senior officers of 2 and 3 years being the leadership in the field, and there really wasn't the type of guidance that you needed in the field to help officers advance, to help them grow. There was an attempt at community policing, and I believe that within your sergeants and your patrol captain, there was a belief that community policing was a significant need, and there was an attempt to move forward, but there wasn't the appropriate level of effort, and some of the things that happened literally were for the sake of saying they were doing community policing. And we talked a little bit about, for example, and I'm sorry, it's been a while, I can't remember the name of the substation. Can you help me, Chief? Yes. And when we first went out and we talked to officers, and the officer said to us, you know, we've been here for months and we haven't seen a single community, or we haven't seen a single member of the neighborhood. We recognize that this is in a high-profile area, that people don't want to come here and talk to us, and we've asked our supervisors, you know, is this something we should evaluate? And we were told that it's not our place to say, and we later learned that that came down from the leadership, that, you know, this is something that's in place, this is something we publicize, whether it's working or not, it's going to still happen. Made no sense, and it really took community policing in the wrong direction. Discipline was inconsistent. It wasn't appropriate. It lacked accountability. I told you that the internal affairs really didn't follow a positive. It was very poorly done. Discipline was the same piece. You know, police departments that institute progressive discipline, when they look at things like procedural justice, you know, the application of the golden rule, hold people accountable, hold them accountable for things they do wrong, train them to do better. In Beloit, what we saw was there wasn't a lot of serious discipline, even in cases where there should have been serious discipline. But the officers were demoralized even by counseling, because in many cases they felt that if they received counseling, it was literally a death sentence on things that they may want to do in the future, because without the right support from the right supervisors, that they couldn't move forward. And so discipline was really felt that it was a heavy burden on them. Yet at the same time, when you look at the discipline and you see not a lot of serious discipline, it was how it was internalized within the organization. Counseling in almost every organization is a tool to help officers understand what they've done wrong, allow them to do better, really used for all those issues that were simple mistakes, learning moments, and it's truly not how it was felt or seen there. Lack of coaching, counseling obviously didn't occur. You know, it was a high number of disciplinary actions at a low level with absolutely no commendations. So in 2014, now we were told that this statistic was wrong, but we never received evidence to show us this. It may have been wrong. There may have been a few areas of commendation that came down from higher than the immediate supervisor, but there were no examples in the file and no one could bring any forward to us. And the department felt that this was a new phenomenon that was coming on, the commendations that was coming on because Hillard Hines was showing up and the department was under scrutiny. So there was a real lack of balance in that. The failure to appropriately staff. You really are in a difficult position. We spend a lot of time in investigations looking at what was happening there, and you have a serious crime problem. You had a violent crime problem that is not uncommon to cities your size, especially in this type of environment, and none of the officers had the tools to really take it forward. You were fortunate because you had a couple of detectives were truly outstanding. They were very good. They had a great reputation with your district attorney, and they were able to help move cases forward. However, there is no sergeant. There is no one supervising daily casework. Your investigations commander openly told us, I didn't want to come here. I shouldn't be here. I don't have the tools to do the job, and so literally he didn't. And your unit largely went unsupervised, and it just caused problems throughout the entire investigative unit in almost everything that they did. The fortunate piece that you had, again, is that you had a base of detectives that in many ways knew how to do their job and were able to carry the day despite the fact that they didn't have any leadership. Budgetary considerations, things seem to be funded in a haphazard way There was a lot of questions and a lot of misunderstanding within the department on how things got funded, on how priorities were set. Many of the decisions may have been the right ones, but because they were never communicated, even in many cases down to the captain's level, there wasn't a real understanding. There was inconsistencies in so many of the processes based on selection and based on operations. We spent a lot of time looking at the SWAT team, and what we saw again was a pretty professional unit that knew what they were doing, but they really weren't following policies and procedures that you would consider best practices. It was much more, you're going to do what I tell you to do. Fortunately, again, you had some good people, you didn't run into crisis, but there was no real policies and procedures in place that would really move this high-risk unit in the proper direction forward. Finding 10 really looked at I don't know how to say this, the department-wide impact of the lack of knowledge on so many issues, starting with the command, starting with issues even as we looked at court decisions, about testimony, we talked to the district attorney, we looked at legal guidance, and this critical piece of the knowledge that helped you move forward not only was missing, in many cases it was just acted upon wrongly. We talked about some of these in the previous area as well. Lot of opportunity to do significantly more training. Legal areas is one. It's not that the department went without training. There was some significant training offered. Your SWAT team was very well trained. Other officers were able to receive some specific training. Supervisors went to Northwestern School of Staff and Command. So you had pockets of really progressive training that was done well. But for the most part, the simple things, the little things, the legal training, the policy training, the policies that did exist, even the ones that were inconsistent, officers didn't know how to act on them because they weren't really trained on them. They may have been put forward in a roll call, they may have been told to sign them, but there was no real training to speak of. Technology challenges, this is one that I have to back off of the department for in some ways and say that technology challenges exist in almost every organization right now. Technology is advancing so much quicker than communities can afford to pay for it that they often miss out on opportunities. But even the rudimentary pieces, we saw some implementation of things like crime mapping that the patrol division was doing, but there was so little understanding and the tools didn't really exist and the resources didn't exist to get that done right. So you really have some things that you need to do well, that you need to focus on. Simple things that agencies have done in other places is to back up and not buy the $1 million tools and look and see how we can look at data differently, how we can look at it less expensively, how we can bring in training for specific officers to act as mentors within the shifts to use the tools that you have, because officers were given a records management system that really wasn't adequately used. It wasn't used very well in patrol. It wasn't used really at all in investigations in the way it should be used to maintain. So there are a lot of challenges in technology. Community-oriented policing, I could tell you from our discussions with the community, our discussions with the department, and looking to see what's going on across the country, your best investment right now is to make sure that you continue to move forward in your community-oriented policing programs. There is an erosion of trust within the city of the police department. This is going on across the country. People are questioning what's going on, and I think that you have the mechanisms to build trust within your community. You have a department that's ready to move forward in a more positive way, and I would strongly suggest that you start embracing some of those programs, and I know that some of them have already started to come forward. Really a good way to move forward without a lot of expense. We talked about the failure of a lot of the community engagement and the community programs already. This really goes back to, again, not only technology, but using data more appropriately, using the information that you have, the tools that you do have to bring forward information to patrol officers, investigators, and supervisors so they can make better decisions. There's very little of that going on right now. Very little in the way of information sharing. Within the department, it's virtually non-existent, so The patrol sergeants I watched do a really good job recapping the events of the day, and they really did a very good job in patrol of talking about some themes that they're seeing in calls. Outside of that, there was no discussion with external agencies, even internal agencies like the DAG unit. There was no coordination. So you're not sharing information even within units. There was very little cross-pollination between investigations and patrol, even what's going on with the cases that were going on. This was an area that I could tell you that while we were still finishing up, we saw significant advancements in, because it's an easy area to fix. It's easy to tell the detectives, we expect you to go to roll call, we expect you to talk about cases, we expect to get feedback to patrol officers, and we see some of those movements already. So we talked about hiring. The hiring processes, never seen anything like that before. I never saw a single individual make decisions about hiring in a government agency the way that they were made in Beloit. I don't believe that they were done right. I don't believe they were done in the best interest of the city or law, and that's all pretty much outlined in the report. It's pretty well documented in a matrix that lays out why the decisions were made. I don't think, I'm not going to say that they were made with evil intent. They were just made wrong. They were done improperly, and they put you in a difficult position. This continues to be more of the same thing. There was a lot of decisions made in a vacuum without understanding. One of the biggest problems that happen in a police department is there's often positions that people want to move into. They want personal development. They want to do a job which they perceive as more fun. And the difficulty that every department has is when I pick an officer, I know if he or she is the right officer to pick, there's still 3 or 4 other officers that wanted that job as well. And when leadership is present and communications is present, officers who put in for jobs are mentored, or they're explained why they didn't get the job, or they understand what they need to do to improve to maybe get the job. None of that existed. It didn't exist anywhere, and people were often at a loss. Even though they know that the person that got the job may be a better choice, no one ever really sat down to tell them how the decision was made or what they could do in the future to be a more viable candidate. So I'm going to stop for a second. We have a lot of recommendations, and I can go through them quickly again, as this was pretty fast. There was a lot of information, and I just would like to know how you would like me to proceed at this point.
My thought at this point moving forward would be that through each of the 11 specific areas, perhaps we can highlight within each section those recommendations. And at this time, I think it would be appropriate for our interim chief, Dave Zabowski, to come forward and speak to some of those areas as well, so that we can address specifically with the public the progress that's been made, significant changes in the department that address the most critical and urgent concerns that are outlined in the report.
That's how we'll proceed.
Thank you. So as I said, then the report goes into detail in 11 chapters that dissect this in further. And I talked a lot about many of these recommendations as I talked about the problem. So I'm going to pick out a couple of the key. And it wasn't, well, I'm going to say it wasn't a difficult decision, but it's always an uncomfortable decision when you have to say that someone needs to leave an organization in order for it to go forward. But there was, by the time we were about 70% done with our assessment, that path was pretty clear. And the deeper we got, that sometimes you just need new people that are going to come in and turn the ship. And that was really our primary recommendation, is that there needed to be a change in leadership, and there needed to be strong leadership. It was at a point where all of our assessment team unilaterally believed that this ship could not be righted with the leaders that were on board, that it just was not in the best interest of the city of Beloit or the department. For so many reasons, as we outline in the report, it comes back to in almost every section. Even when leadership wasn't responsible for the problems that existed in that section, they were responsible for the decisions that caused those. And investigations is a great point in that the leadership of investigations suffered dramatically, but the leadership of the department knew it and didn't act on it, and knew it when they made the decision, knew that the person wasn't qualified for the job, didn't insist on training, didn't move it forward, didn't move that person to a position where they could do the best job that they could with the resources they had. So that's why our first recommendation and our strongest recommendation in this department, in this report, was that change had to occur. And I think that when I said that I wanted to congratulate you, in talking to people in the department over the last 2 months and hearing about, to have people in the department call us and say, this is what's happening now, isn't that great? Tells me that, you know, your leadership in the department, which I give a lot of credit to your interim chief, but your interim chief is also empowering your existing command to act as leaders, and they're stepping up to the plate. So I could tell you that you've made a good decision. It seems to be the best decision for the department, and it seems to be thriving. So I don't know, do you want me to go through these one by one or just kind of hit the highlights?
Hit the highlights, I would
Because
say.
there's about 100 of them. You know, the recommendations, the other piece, communications and transparency, that's going to be critical, and you all serve a key role in this. You not only have a right but an obligation to know what's going on within the police department, to have a keen understanding of what their strategies are and how they're moving forward in the city. You should be overseeing that. Your police leadership should be comfortable telling you that. They should be here bragging about that to you. So make sure you insist on that transparency, and make sure that transparency exists down into the department. You should be asking the questions, how do the officers know what they should be doing? And you know, through this whole leadership piece, can we get the presentation back up? It's much better looking than seeing me. Through the whole leadership piece, there's just several recommendations that go to each fundamental part on how you can improve it. Everything from implementing integrity programs to doing a better job at performance reviews to looking at what does the law say I have to do and what are the best practices. So section 1, do you want to talk about that?
Okay, so I'll cover a couple of the key points in terms of where we are right now. And to start with, I'll echo a couple of Ken's comments because there's been dramatic change here at the police department. I'm very proud of, and so should you be proud of, the men and women of this department, because they have been through a dramatic change both before, during, and after this has started. They have shown their level of integrity and commitment to being dedicated law enforcement officers, both in terms of kind of hanging in there when things weren't necessarily going well for them, but also in terms of the last 7 months of the dramatic rate of change that we have placed upon them. And I think they've responded well. So I'm very proud of them for that, and I think that's the best thing going forward that we have to build upon. In terms of change at the top, the current position structure of our command, the deputy chief position, and we have a vacant captain position currently, is being completely reevaluated and reassessed, both in terms of functionality and necessity. As I went through my one-on-ones with nearly every member of the department from top to bottom, I found little significant attachment at all to the deputy chief rank. And in other ranks, I think too much autonomy or authority was given, and so the way the department was functioning, the way it was being overseen, if you will, was not in best keeping with best practices. And I don't mean to denigrate anyone by saying that, but I'm just telling you what I found out in talking to the troops, and my observations are the same. So as we evaluate what we need in the department, both in terms of position and responsibilities, those positions will remain under analysis. In terms of the command role, we have evolved the responsibility of the command staff. Our command staff meetings are team-oriented. They provide input. They have been given greater responsibility, and decision-making has been pushed down through the organization, down to the supervisory level where in many cases it belongs. I observed many functions of the department somewhere at a command level when they should have been at a supervisory level, and vice versa. So we are working on correcting those issues. The new strategic operational plan was offered up at budget time, and I think that's a great start for the larger city plan that the city manager will be leading. We've initiated a collaborative command culture. We have regular monthly meetings with the sergeants in which they offer their input, suggestions, and advice, and they have been really the key to initiating a large amount of the change. Those frontline supervisors are the ones out there leading the cops every day, and if they don't understand why the changes are being made and what changes are being effectuated, they can't get the cops to buy into it. And so they've done a great job at that. We meet regularly with them. We meet monthly with the union board as well to address any of their concerns, contract issues, etc. And so we've established some good relationships there. And we've established department-wide teams, both in terms of our assessment and recruitment. Our new vision, mission, and values statement was put together by a team of officers and voted on by the entire department. And we're currently looking at our uniforms with the department team. In terms of leadership and the department and communications and transparency, I'm out all the time, either popping into the different areas of the department at roll call, sending out email updates to the entire department about changes, upcoming events, etc., as is the command staff. Again, I've met with nearly every member of the department, and we've established, as was mentioned earlier, a much more ceremonious process to swear in and promote our officers, because really it's an important job, and they need to understand and they need to feel that it's important if that's how we want them to go out and perform their duties and to treat the public with dignity and respect. We instituted a new hiring and promotion process that not only involves the command staff, it involves our community. We invited community members into our interview panels and assessment panels. The feedback on that has been very positive. The results, both in terms of hiring and promotion, more transparent to the officers, and included with the new promotion process is a feedback loop from which they can get that necessary information that will help them develop their skills so they can do better the next time around. Integrity and judgment. Thank you. Actually, were two of our new core values that have been integrated into our vision, mission, and values, and it's been embedded into the organization. All new members are administered the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics, again to remind them of the importance and ethical integrity that's necessary for them to perform their jobs. In terms of relationship with the community, I participated in a number of community events, as have our officers. And as we push towards a more enhanced community policing platform, their assessment is not on numbers and doors and tickets, etc., but it is on proactive community engagement. It's on forming relationships within their beats and learning the people that live there. And we have established partnerships with the State Line Boys and Girls Club, working on a baseball card project that will feature all of the officers. We've had relationships with the Family Services of Beloit in enhancing our domestic violence and sexual assault approach. And we're working with the State Line Community Foundation Women's Fund on some human trafficking and sexual assault issues. We established a crime analyst position, which did not exist before, and we utilized an existing vacancy to do so that we can actually implement intelligence-led policing. We actually had a person in our midst who, again, by virtue of the one-on-one meetings that occurred, was brought to my attention that sitting in our ranks is someone getting a master's degree in crime analysis in that field, and applied for and got the position and has been sent out for some additional training. And since the inception of that, that has helped kind of weave the information sharing across the department, the detectives going to the roll calls, our crime analysts being able to put together real-time information for the cops. Here's someone that's now wanted and involved in a new crime. Who are they associated with? What are their cars? Who are their girlfriends? Where do they live? The analyst is able to put that together and pop that out to the cops electronically, to the MDCs, or they get it at roll call. That's information that they never had. And when you talk in terms of overall broad philosophy about whether or not the police can affect crime in a city, unfortunately, I think the belief that they were embedded with was that you could not. And so just write tickets and check doors. But in fact, that's a false belief. Cops can have a huge effect on crime in a city. They have to be given the support and the tools and the equipment to do so. But this addition of the crime analysis really allows the cops to go out and start putting cases together and concentrating on those in our community that don't like to follow the law, that are creating the crime, fear, and disorder. We created a new measure of accountability with our shift commanders. Again, we did not have a decision maker on the night shifts, and it was a coin toss. You're both sergeants, you make the decision, or no one would make the decision, and a cop would make the decision. So we now have shift commanders who are given a number of responsibility to make those types of calls, to make sure that resources that are needed at a particular scene are garnered, and that the information is properly passed off and follow-up is completed and passed on to the next shift. We have a new eligibility list for sergeants to ensure continuity at the supervisor level. So when we have an opening, we do not have to start a new process. We have a list that we can draw from. We've initiated a new performance evaluation system, which is not based on the beat management plan. It is based on, again, proactive community policing benchmarks. And along with that, one of our commanders has put together a personnel development plan. So again, we can start to measure from our personnel what their career goals are, and we can assist them with getting the training and mentorship so they can attain those goals. In terms of supporting our personnel, I've issued over 27 letters of recognition to both sworn and civilian staff, again reinforcing the positive behaviors of the new culture that we've been shifting to. And we made great progress in terms of adherence to law and best practices. And unfortunately, by no fault of their own, the law enforcement officers in this department had received substandard training, guidance, and mentorship. They were not aware, in many instances, of basic Fourth Amendment exceptions, Fifth Amendment exceptions, basic functional law enforcement knowledge that you would expect cops to know and to implement in a situation. Again, this wasn't their fault. They weren't provided the training. They weren't provided the guidance. And we have been successful in bringing in experts from the state, both to give training in legal updates, domestic violence investigations, sexual assault investigations, human trafficking recognition and investigations, procedural justice and legitimacy, strip searches, internal investigations, and social media training for our supervisors. So they've gotten a large breadth of training in a short amount of time, which I have seen them put to good use. Now kind of armed with this information that they weren't maybe as brushed up on as they should have been, they're out there putting cases together. This last week alone, we made 2 traffic stops, recovered 2 guns out of cars from people we know who are involved in violent crime in Beloit. That's preventing the next violent crime. And that's how they're taking what they've learned and putting it to good use. And that wasn't happening before, because they didn't think they could have that effect. So I see that as a significant shift, both in their approach and in their beliefs and confidence in their abilities. And in terms of policy, we have shifted from an accreditation platform to Lexipol, which is a leading provider of risk management policies that allows also for the officers to take an online test after reading the policy, which they have to pass to ensure that they understand the policy and that they can implement it in the field. And that covers your first recommendation, so I'll turn it back over to Ken.
So I think it's important, the one piece that the Chief glossed over that I would suggest maybe down the road that he give you more information on in the procedural justice training that the department, so I covered that a little bit. It's probably one of the most important pieces of community policing that's going right now, and it's being made possible because of the changes you're making in the police department. It really, in essence, is the methodology of policing that all people deserve to be treated with respect. All people need to be told what they've done wrong or what the problems are. They need to be given the opportunity to respond to that. Now, this isn't just officers' requirements when dealing with a citizen in a traffic stop. It is the methodology that the chief must use internally. So when you accept this policy, not only do you change the way you discipline and train, you then put the officers out with the responsibility of saying, if I'm going to give this to you, you have to give it to the citizens of Beloit. It's really a great program. It's a foundation for where you're going to move forward, and thrilled to the fact to hear that the training's been going on within the department. So that was recommendation 1. Everybody good? I think that, you know, so much of a lot of these pieces have been covered. I think that the important parts, can we get this back up? There we go. We went through all of these, and I know the chief has already hit on things like, you know, changes to the beat assignment, changes to BMP, patrol supervision. They all go through a series of recommendations that help build a roadmap, and I can go into them, but I think hearing about 1 or 2 of the pieces that you've done is probably more instructional than going through what we said you should do. I'm going to stand next to you now.
All right.
Speed this up, you know.
Yeah, okay, so we'll kind of cut to some of the high points. I guess in terms of the beat management plan, what we're doing now to further community policing is looking at various other projects across the country. And one of our commanders had now the opportunity, part of the training, to attend the IACP conference last fall. And we picked up some new things that were out there. One of them's happening in Kalamazoo. They have a canvassing project and that's a larger city than Beloit, in which they, over the period of a year, make contact with everyone that lives in their beat. And it's part of the evaluation and assessment of the officer that in their non-obligated time they're out making contact. So they start to learn who lives in their neighborhoods, who doesn't. It better informs their decisions in terms of stops and activities and that type of thing. And it also creates more of a conduit for the community to respond to us and tell us things, because you start to build that trust and collaboration. So we're looking at that along with a number of other platforms and looking to experiment with those. I guess the continuous coverage, I think Ken talked about creating the shift overlaps. I think a key point is allocation and overtime, staffing allocation and overtime. And previously there was no method to reliably assess our use of overtime. It was bulked into large categories that was really not usable whatsoever in terms of trying to establish a substantive budget, in terms of looking at how we use overtime to determine whether or not we're spending too much on training or too much on call-ins or too much on something else. It didn't exist. So we created a number of different overtime categories so that we could properly assess that. And so when we come before the council in the future and say, you know, I think we need this many cops, this many sergeants, A, B, or C, we'll have some data to back it up in terms of what our usage and our experience has been. Prior to that, you were pretty much flipping a coin and spending overtime. In addition, the shift commanders have to authorize overtime. So they authorize and they monitor the use of overtime by the personnel working extension of duty. I think I'll skip over to the public assistance and the social media, and we've greatly enhanced that to expedite communication with the public, both in terms of crime issues and getting information from them. And our sergeants have now been trained from the street. They can tweet out crime or public safety information. We're creating a most wanted page on the website that will allow everyone to go on and see the photos of the 30-plus wanted felons that have warrants in Beloit. And I think that's going to help us capture some of them, because from time to time they return. And we've attended a number of community meetings and listening sessions. I think I'll end on that one there, sir.
So we made several recommendations really in alignment with internal affairs, really everything from how to conduct investigations to how to reach conclusions to how to add transparency to the process of understanding why discipline occurs, and then the appropriate procedures all along the way, all the way down to finalizing a case to issuing a complaint to the individual. That really, that whole process needed to be rebuilt from the ground up.
And I don't think we can echo it enough that this internal investigative process was not only broken, it was dysfunctional. And in coming into trying to determine whether or not citizens' complaints have been properly and fully investigated was very difficult. I issued a temporary directive on July 13th to ensure that all complaints were investigated, because the prior system allowed a supervisor to determine the veracity and the extent of the potential citizen complaint. And I think common sense tells us that you don't really know the veracity and extent of the complaint until you actually investigate and interview people, which would include interviewing witnesses and interviewing maybe the officer or other officers involved before you come to either the conclusion that the complaint is not significant or that the officer should or should not be disciplined. So this has been kind of a very difficult issue to kind of maneuver through. I asked that all of our internal files be located. They were supposed to be centrally located under lock and key. However, we found they were in 3 different locations at various levels of security. And the result of the internal audit of our internal affairs files found that we have 21 files that we can't find. I don't know what happened to them. I can never go back and read those files. And this is significant in a number of ways, not only in terms of looking at if you were trying to use them for progressive discipline, but when officers testify in court, there's a Giglio rule, right? And the U.S. attorney and the DA will contact the chief and say, you know, these people are coming up to testify. I need you to look at their internal files to make sure there aren't any issues regarding untruthfulness or anything that would bring into question their integrity on the stand. If I don't have the file, I can't tell them that. So in some instances, my response may be, there's a discipline listed here, but I don't know the particulars of it. Some of the information isn't even correct in terms of the log sheet that's been kept. And so we now have located everything but those files that we can't locate in there. We're revamping the entire process. We're creating an electronic database. The other issue with our internal filing system, if you would call it that, I guess, is that there was no way for me to go and say how many complaints were lodged against Charles Haynes. Couldn't do it. The only way I can do that is to go each year, look through the sheet for Mr. Haynes' name, and then find out what investigations were done. And there's also no way for me to go and see how many commendations Mr. Haynes might have. So the system did not allow any type of efficiencies, I guess, in terms of trying to look at a discipline and then looking at someone's past and determining what I should do or what should be done. So we're now instituting that as an electronic database that will not only track it accurately but allow us to pull up at a glance what an officer has or has not been accused of. And I think that goes in towards one of Ken's other points when we talk about early warning systems and those types of things. If you don't have a system that tracks these things, you can't have an early warning system because it's pulling information that's not there. Yeah. Let's see. You think we covered that? Yes, we did. Okay. Plate furnaces. I think we're pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah.
And all of these recommendations I've already talked to you about in the presentation. You know, investigations, we talked quite a bit about that. There's significant problems in the entire process, and I've gone into great detail, and the report gives several recommendations on areas that you can do to get out of that and to really move the investigations unit forward in a progressive manner. And I know several of them have been done already. You want to hit a couple of the highlights?
Sure. One thing that wasn't in existence was any form of case management, case follow-up, case prioritization. And I think in terms of what area next needs the biggest look is really the investigative side. Well, there's still a lot to do across the board. Our detective bureau needs is really kind of the next area to focus on in terms of implementing technology and implementing supervision so that they get the guidance and they have the resources to get the job done. So we've initiated some, I guess I would say, rudimentary case management and follow-up systems just so that we have a gauge as to what cases are pending, who's working on what. It helps a little bit with case assignment, but we have really a long way to go in terms of that. In terms of supervision, we need someone in there, that detective sergeant position, that has the knowledge, skills, and ability not only of a supervisor but an investigator to mentor and develop our detectives and to help bring cases together and solve these things. So that's really a big thing on the horizon. The DAG unit has been retasked, and instead of spending time really attempting to get narcotic search warrants, which at least 2 or maybe 3 other units in the county are already doing, they have been focusing on our wanted felons, our newly wanted persons, absconders, Again, they were involved in these arrests with the guns this week, so they are really focusing in by using the crime analysts and trying to identify who the problem persons are in the community and assisting the detectives with recent scenes and that type of activity. So that's gone well. Evidence management was a big area, both in terms of liability and concern. Chain of custody of our evidence obviously is very significant. When an agency has an issue with that, it can have quite an adverse effect on cases in court. It can also have an adverse effect on people who have property here that maybe should have property returned. We hired some outside contractors to conduct an evidence audit because it became clear that we had issues there. And there was an issue identified in 2014 in which one of the commanders asked for an audit, but he was denied that request. So our independent contractors came in and looking just at the three big things that are most relevant, guns, drugs, and money, identified a number of glaring issues that we are currently working on. But the bottom line in terms of firearms is we have 5 guns that we can't find and we don't know what happened to them. Since 2005, we returned 158 guns purportedly to owners, but we have no receipts that we did this. There was no receipting mechanism that was in place being utilized in our evidence unit, and we have now established a receipt form and a process, so that is now being done. And we have other issues in which things were improperly placed, couldn't be found, and were found in other areas. In terms of the drugs that we have in our evidence area, again, a number of improperly marked, couldn't find, 22 items that were not located, and there's no record of destruction, which is about 486 grams of marijuana and a small amount of cocaine that may have been destroyed. We have no idea. Can't account for it. So we now have a base on all of that. And in terms of money, we had tens of thousands of dollars in our safe that was not properly acted upon within the statutory time limits that would enable us to seize it as part of a drug investigation, and thus we will have to turn that money over to the county treasurer by statute. And so our evidence people, both in terms of shoring up the process, implementing a scanner system, and making sure that they are following chain of custody and doing their job properly. We're also going to have to initiate a project really to go through all of these things that need to be properly disposed, returned, or submitted to the proper statutory authority. So that's going to be an ongoing issue. We have moved a person over from a different position to assist the evidence custodian, but that's going to be that's going to take some time to get that completed.
We talk about special operations. There was, again, I talked about this a little bit earlier. You had a highly trained and a competent, somewhat mismanaged special operations group. There was problems found across the board in how equipment was purchased, how it was passed out, who got perks, who went to training. Was the appropriate things done to ensure officer safety, not only yours but others, things like deconfliction, making sure that the house that you're going to kick the door on wasn't part of an undercover operation of another agency. Common police practices that should be in place to ensure the safety of your officers, your citizens, and others just were in many cases ignored. And so that are detailed in our recommendations, and I know that a lot of changes here have been made as well.
Sure. I guess just to highlight that, we've basically, when we put SWAT under a new command, there were a number of issues in terms of decision making, the use of personnel, and some safety concerns. We have a new commander running SWAT, and we have integrated in the crisis negotiators with our SWAT team, which is best practice and really common sense. A lot of these situations start out as a crisis negotiation, and you always want to have that tactical asset in the event things don't go well. But the main focus is to resolve these issues through de-escalation and negotiation rather than tactical entry. So those two teams have now trained together a couple of times in the last couple of months, and we will be adding to the negotiator cadre and training of personnel and crisis intervention training.
We've talked about the problems in policy, legal updates, things like that. I think that Chief's covered many of the areas that they've already improved on: legal updates, policy knowledge. Anything you want to add on that one? When we talk about bias-based policing, one of the things that we didn't see is we didn't see the appropriate capturing of information that ensured. This is. I want to make sure I'm clear on this. Is that not only do we want to believe that our officers aren't acting with bias, whether it's based on race or neighborhood or a variety of factors that are constitutionally protected, we want to be able to test that, and progressive departments collect information and monitor that, and that was not being done. Even information that was collected was not being monitored. Training wasn't really being given out, nor was the training that did exist wasn't evaluated. We had several complaints on a couple of modules of training about how ridiculous it was, and when we went back to the training coordinator about the evaluation of the individuals, they said, well, they were state certified, so I didn't think they needed to be evaluated. So there was no real understanding of what the takeaways were from that. So, anything on this you want to hit?
No, I think it's except to say that we have aligned training with the Department Vision, Mission, and Values, so it is not just ambiguous training. It is training with a focus and a purpose, so that they not only are getting the skills that they need in terms of a SWAT member or crisis negotiator, but any other training they're going to, like the Leadership and Police Organizations training that we have about 13 members going to this year, which has been going on in Wisconsin for about 4 or 5 years, that no one from Beloit PD has ever gone to, again, because they didn't know about it, will better prepare future leaders of this department, and will start that development process for many of our personnel. So I think that was a huge step in terms of how we give out training and the types of training that we send personnel to.
So we have some clear recommendations on IT. I think that the pieces that are important is that you really moving forward on using the technology that you have, even if it's not state of the art, it still provides, if the training and usage is if training is done, usage can increase, and you can see the value of the technology. You do have programs and things that you can use, things like early warning, and have had a lot of discussions with the chief and city manager, and we recommend early warning systems, but the reality is it doesn't mean you have to go out and buy a system. And talk to the chief about what he's put in place to monitor, one, just putting a discipline structure in place and monitoring those cases and changing the way you do complaints really brings it in line with that. Most of these things are the continued struggles of modernization of IT as well.
And I just want to comment on that. One of the things we discovered also in terms of our IT management and governance, and we have a lot of our records management services, et cetera, that are born out of Rock County. And we discovered that we had not been active participants on many of those subcommittees and those committees that made decisions about how IT in all these systems was going to be deployed. Therefore, we would find out about things at the last minute. We would be in crisis trying to implement IT changes within the department, which stresses out not only the person doing it, but the cops on the street. And it's not well received then, and that continued to be an issue. So we have now assigned personnel to regularly attend these subcommittees and be participants, to bring the information back, and so that our voice is heard a little bit at that level as well, because we are probably the furthest the agency that gets service from Rock County, but we did not have much of a participation in the process. So that should help alleviate some of that, some of those gaps for us at the county city level.
We talked about a lot of these topics already. Again, most of this has been implemented or has been addressed, from looking at the resource officer to community engagement to establishing a crime analyst. Anything you want to hit on this?
No, I think.
We really talk about staffing. There's, and again, we've talked about a lot of these issues. Staffing is a difficult piece. It costs money. It's the biggest part of your budget. trying to figure out the best way to use your resources. It seems to be the most effective move forward now in staffing those critical positions. Putting in processes, and we go into great detail in the recommendations about the processes that will add legitimacy to hiring, to promotion, to selection. Those will all be important pieces moving forward. We've talked about how the department's changed a number of these things already. Any more you want to talk about that?
No, I think we're going to continue to grow the direction that we're going.
So that unfortunately brings us to the end. I guess I really want to end with, first, congratulations for sitting through this very long presentation in detail. Not so much that these aren't things that you haven't read or didn't know, but that you lead the transparency of making sure that the public has the access to the information, know what you have been struggling with and what the issues are and how they're being addressed. And I think it bodes well for you, it bodes well for the department and the city of Beloit. So if there are no questions from me, I'm done.
Do you have any additional questions for Ken?
Closing comments.
Right, go ahead, Madam City Manager.
Thank you. As previously stated, the city did invest significant dollars to have this assessment conducted. And there are times when organizations request or have reports and recommendations prepared that sit on the shelf. This is simply too critical to allow that to happen. And so I thought it was incredibly important that we go through this in some level of detail to make sure that we are held accountable for making continuous improvements in the department and the city as a whole. So we will report back as progress continues, and I appreciate your time in listening to all of this information so that we can better disseminate the progress and improvements that we're making and the progress and improvements that we expect to see in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'd like to express my appreciation to you, Ken, and your people for doing this for us. I think it's a bit, those of us who've been on the council for a while know that this has been a long time coming. We would have loved to have had you speak to the community before now, but things had to unfold as they did. Thank you very much. All right then, I think at this point we can go ahead and we would normally move on to item 11, which would be reports from boards and city officers. There are none, so our final act of the evening would be adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Sloniker.
Second.
Second by DeForest. All in favor of adjournment say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned.